Islam ensnares every moment of a Muslim's life. How you eat, how you go to the bathroom, how you put on shoes, how you have sex. Every single aspect of your life is mapped out so that there's minimal opportunity to think. You are trained to just follow. Do as you're told. Don't ask why. Get in line with the rest of the Ummah, community of Muslims. Like a school of fish, it's instinctual. That's the way it is. That's the way the brainwashing goes. Like a soldier trained to take orders and react. Thinking is deadly. Questioning is punished. This is much more true for women than it is for men. Under Islam, a woman's sense of agency is non-existent. Her individuality is completely erased, or rather, never given an opportunity to flourish in the first place. Sometimes, like it was for me, the statement is both literal as well as figurative. My entire being was dampened by a black shroud, covered from head to toe, without even my eyes connecting with the outside world. I'd float around other humans almost like a ghost. I could see them, but they couldn't see me. I was invisible. My humanity was completely eradicated. I wasn't Yasmin. I was a faceless figure shrouded in black. My wants, needs, interests, desires, preferences were never even considered, least of all by me. I didn't know that there was such thing as choice. I'd never made a decision. I just did as I was told. I was miserable. But my misery also made me feel guilty. Why couldn't I move along with the other fish? Why did I yearn to escape their hold? Wasn't this the path to heaven? Any other direction was hell. Why wasn't I strong enough to fight the devil luring me to imagine a life where I could swim in different waters? Islam is ingenious in its hold. Aspects of its tactics can be found in Mormonism, with Scientologists and Jehovah's Witnesses. But Islam is the only religion that combines all the different ensnaring elements into one, and then turns up the intensity tenfold. Islam's hold on your body, mind, and spirit is such that almost 15 years after denouncing the religion, I'm still discovering and suffering from remnant conditioning of my mind. I don't think I'll ever be truly free. I was only able to free my body. But I have not failed. My daughters are free. My daughters will never be able to relate to or understand any of this world. They will listen with wide eyes, unable to fathom that existence. And so, even if I have to take this indoctrination with me to the grave, I don't mind. I'm happy to take it with me 6 feet under, far away from my daughters, where it can't hurt anyone else from my bloodline. They'll all be free to swim in any direction they choose.
Islam ensnares every moment. Written by Yasmin Mohammed and edited by Lalo Dagach. Very powerful. A real testimony. You can find that on YouTube if you type in her name and the title. And if you know anyone, if one of your loved ones, your spouse, your partner perhaps, poo-poos you when you tell them that we are at war with cultists, let them look at the YouTube video and then see whether or not they change their view. Marseille, Allahu Akbar was screamed as he slit the throats. Las Vegas, they fired automatic rifles, for goodness sake. 50 murdered. Practical silence from our so-called leaders. Just a small comment in the mainstream media. Let's move on, they say. Let's get on with our way of life. It won't change our way of life, even though it has changed the lives of thousands directly and hundreds of thousands indirectly. Do you know, before 2001, how easy it was to get on a plane? For example, I say hundreds of thousands, of course, it's actually hundreds of millions. Our politicians are absolutely failing us. They're failing us on this. They're failing us on the EU. And they're failing us on capitalism. Andrew Bloomin Marr on the BBC yesterday. But capitalism isn't popular, he said. It isn't popular because it's hardly discussed. Therefore, it's not understood. And when they do discuss it, they lie about it left, right and centre. Pardon the pun. But it's discussed on the Booms and Busts show every week, where hundreds of people download the show and listen about free market capitalism, where I tell you what I perceive to be the truth about what's really going on, why socialism and cronyism are destroying us, how free market capitalism and that way of thinking is the only way we can get out of our malaise. Unfortunately, listener, I don't have any confidence whatsoever that we will ever get out of it. We are in Alice's hole. We are tumbling down and down and down. What we are seeing around the world, I'll talk about Catalonia in a moment. These are scenes which Hollywood predicted 30 years ago. Remember Schwarzenegger and The Running Man? We are seeing the scenes happen right now. Blade Runner. They thought it wouldn't be there until the mid-21st century. It's happening now. The dystopian science fiction future is happening now. Have you seen the YouTube video of Chinese street cameras? The moment that you enter the shot, the camera immediately says who you are and basic details about you. It talks about the cars and buses that it sees immediately. 1984 is with us. Talking about the politicians failing us. So UKIP had its leadership election. Anne-Marie Waters didn't win. Great lady, except she's a socialist. So she gets lots of black marks, rightly so. But she's got her heart in the right place. And what did Nigel Farage say? She hopes she leaves now. Nigel, you've lost it, mate. UKIP is toast. They are now the United Kingdom Irrelevance Party. The new leader is, what's his name? Nobody knows, because he's an irrelevance. He's a man in a grey suit. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome again to Jonathan Davis's Booms and Bus Show. It is Monday, the 2nd of October, 2017. Have you seen the Catalonian videos? They're all over the Booms Bus Show Twitter feed. All you have to do is go on to Booms Bus Show, scroll down, and you will see them. I showed one to my wife last night. Her mouth was wide open. She covered her mouth. Her eyes were in shock. She used the absolutely correct word for what she was seeing, that First World Spanish police were doing to the citizens of Catalonia. Grotesque. In the European Union, which, as you well know, states that any European state which abuses the human rights of its people will no longer be in the European Union. Now, you watch those videos and you tell me if the Spanish people, the Catalonian people's human rights, were not abused this weekend. And moreover, you had Catalonians sleeping in polling stations so that they could ensure the polling stations would open yesterday. Now, people tell me that the referendum was illegal. It is true. The referendum for Catalonia becoming independent of Spain was illegal. There's no question it was illegal. The law sometimes is an ass. You do realise that slavery is legal in some parts of the world. The law sometimes is an ass. Don't tell me about illegalities. There is a higher moral standard here. And the higher moral standard is that over 2 million people voted this weekend on independence. 90% of them voted yes to leave Spain, to become an independent state. And of course, what do we see the Vice President of the EU Parliament saying? Ramon Luis Valcárcel. Today we have witnessed a nationalistic propaganda act, undemocratic, a coup attempt against Spanish democracy, and so a coup against Europe. A coup against Europe. That's all he cares about. The last thing in the world he cares about is democracy. They are calling the freedom protesters the voters. Think about it. The voters. Undemocratic. We're not talking Venezuela here. North Korea, Zimbabwe, where if you don't vote in the right way in the sham of an election, you get slaughtered. This was a free and fair, closed ballot, where no one could tell what you were voting and no one made you vote in any way. And I'll tell you what, if the Spanish government and the EU governments want Catalonia to stay within Spain, my goodness, did they go about it the wrong way. And they wonder why the Catalonians and the Basques, who'll be next, want to separate from Spain. And they wonder why Britain wants to separate from the EU. And why we see the Remainers as vile anti-democrats who will not accept that we had a free and fair vote. I even had a Twitter idiot today saying to me, so the fact that more people want to remain now than last year, it's actually anti-democratic not to have another referendum. He doesn't accept that you have a referendum, you have a vote, then you implement what the people choose. In his world, you should have as many votes as you need until you get the quote, right, unquote, answer. That is not democracy, you absolute idiot, you fascist. We are in 1984 today. He wrote it, Orwell, in 1948. So what is that? Next year, what will that be? 70 years ago. And 30 odd years after the year that he wrote about. Truth is lies. Honesty is deceit. Facts are made up. This is the whole point of the book. Go and read it, for goodness sake. Orwell was a socialist until he realized the folly of his thinking. He realized the lies of the socialists. Socialism doesn't care about prosperity or freedom. Socialism merely cares about socialism. And, you know, the media, obviously, is putting out the fake news day after day, hour after hour, minute after minute. And it just doesn't affect our politics. It affects our personal finances as well, because the Booms and Bust show is not just about free market capitalism in a conceptual sense. It's also about what you need to do to help ensure you have a secure and comfortable retirement. One thing you must not do is listen to the mainstream media. Stop reading the money pages in the Mail, the Standard, the Telegraph. Stop listening to the money and finance shows on the TV and radio. When you see the pinned to Boom's Bus Show Twitter account of this show, it's show number 27. Open it up and scroll down, and you will see 3 front pages from the Economist Journal. 1999, drowning in oil. 2003, the end of the oil age. 2016, who's afraid of cheap oil? The Economist is owned by the Bilderberg. There's half a dozen of them that own. These guys are the elite of the elite. And when they want you to do something, they do the opposite. When they want you to sell anything to do with oil and commodities from your pension funds, you do the opposite. Because below those headlines on front pages, you then see what did actually happen to oil in 99. A year later, it was up 215%. 2003, a year later, it was up 102%. 2016, 6 months later, it was up 90%. Just going back on Yasmin Mohammed, I forgot to mention, Saudi Arabia apparently has now allowed, in the year 2017, 120 years after the car was invented, they've allowed women to drive. Of course, the rules are that you're above the age of 30 and that you have the authorization of your male guardian. Also, there are strict times of the day and week when you're allowed to drive. So women, as it were, are allowed to drive in the most repressive regime in the world. They're allowed to drive to their own floggings and beheadings. Politicians. We've got the Conservative Party conference. I see the BBC are up in arms. They're very angry. They're hating every moment. It's hardly started. Compare and contrast that to how they treated the Labour Party conference. Oh, how wonderful Jeremy Corbyn is. Oh, Diane Abbott, we love you. John McDonnell, oh, we think you're a bit comical, but hey, you're a lad. You're a great guy. And Tom Watson singing that song to Jeremy. Oh, the Labour Party's coming together. Conservative Party conference. They're falling apart. They hate each other. And Boris Johnson, the Foreign Secretary, should not comment on Brexit. The Foreign Secretary should not comment on foreign affairs? I find it remarkable and ugly that decade after decade, the Conservatives continue to allow the BBC to do its thing. Apparently, Theresa May wants free markets. She wouldn't recognise a free market if it hit her in the face. For example, she's making more money available for Help to Buy. Or as I have always called it, Help to Sell. The idea that making more money available is actually going to help younger people is 1984 Orwellianism. Take away the liquidity, prices will fall. That's how you help younger people. Prices will fall, supply will come in the market, prices will fall, more supply will come in the market, prices will fall, even more supply will come in the market. Take away the liquidity. That's how you help younger people. And it's how you create more equality and opportunity. It's called free markets, listener. Talking about free markets, take a drink. I hear today that Monarch Airlines has gone bust. So I'm thinking, why has Monarch Airlines gone bust? Is it because they sold too many seats at too high prices? Obviously not. I don't actually know the reason, and I haven't analysed it, I haven't investigated it because I'm really not interested in the detail. It's obviously because it's nothing to do with oversupply, over demand for seats. It could be simply they've got too much debt. Well, more fool them. And quite right that they're not being bailed out. I hope. It could simply be that we have such competition in European airline routes that eventually one of them has to go. Well, great. I'm delighted to hear it. That's called free market capitalism. If you just borrow too much, well, more fool you, and eventually you're going to go under. And it got me thinking about Ryanair. The moment I heard about this holiday nonsense and the pilots, I thought, this doesn't sound reasonable. One of the most successful airline corporations on the planet, and they got their holiday scheduling wrong? No. Immediately my antennae suspicions went up. And I just suspect that they realised that they hadn't sold a lot of seats for whatever reason. And they didn't want it out that aircraft after aircraft was a half or a quarter full, and thereby creating negative sentiment, which was already there, but exacerbating it, not creating it. I just wonder if that's the case. I'm not saying that is the case. I'm just wondering out loud. And then there you see, another significant airline has just gone bust. Coincidence? I think not. Have you subscribed to my Booms and Busts report yet, listener? If not, send me an email at jd@theboomsandbustshow.com. I'll put you on the list. You'll never be junk mailed. Your email address will never leave this office. It's free. Also, the Booms and Busts Club is a discussion group over a beer, over a curry, that sort of thing. In the area of Hartford, about 20 miles north of London Centre. If you would like to come along, someone said, do I have to have £500,000 of investments before I can come along? No, not at all. Anyone can come along just to discuss what's going on in the world. And because where else do you get a chance to talk about these things and not be looked at as if you're from outer space? Economics. You know, I've talked about China's One Belt, One Road initiative. I was quite surprised, actually. I was talking to a friend who I thought would have known quite a lot about this. So the fact that he didn't, I'll just spend a moment explaining it a little bit. So 2,000 years ago, China had the Silk Road, where it used to transport silk and other strange items, well, strange to Europeans, that is, from China to Europe. And it was a genius in logistics, almost as genius as the Roman roads. Of course, China was trying to conquer by commerce, not by what I saw at the weekend. We watched some of the Gladiator movie with Russell Crowe. It's truly astounding battle scenes in the first, 20 or 30 minutes. I mean, wonderful, wonderful description, portrayal of what it must have been like. Brutal, ultra efficient. Reminds me of Germany. Anyway, so the 21st century One Belt, One Road is where, well, they've already built 12,000 miles of rail track where trains go from China right across Russia and whatever other countries they come to, eventually to Rotterdam, and from there distributed throughout Europe. Think about that. That is why we can order something on eBay, Amazon, Alibaba, which is the Chinese equivalent of online sales businesses. We can order, and it says it's coming from Hong Kong, it's coming from China, and they can state a date or a range of dates by which we can receive the item. That's how, because it's coming on that train. It's a sensational thing. If you want it more urgently, that you pay more, and it comes on the plane. Well, you can wait 3 weeks for your item. Along with that, there's also the seaways going southwest from China, under India, stopping off at South Africa, and then heading up into Europe, stopping first or offloading in Greece. Can you imagine the size and volume of trade that will be going through Greece within a year or two? It will be breathtaking. Forget everything you believe about the Greek economy. Greece is changing big time. I say to you again, listener, within 5 years, Greece will be the economic tiger of the European continent. So I'm reading from one of the largest commodity producers, miners in the world, BHP Billiton. And I trust them more than I do the Chinese authorities. They're saying the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road initiative, with 400 core projects along those seas, along that land, needs spending of $1,300 billion of infrastructure investment. And it will need 150 million tons of steel. BHP Billiton produces iron ore. And they reckon that will keep Chinese steel mills going for the next 10 years. I don't doubt it. Be under no illusion whatsoever. OBOR is massive to the global economy, and it is a very big feature in why we have had inflation since the beginning of last year, and why I think without a shadow of a doubt now we will have rising inflation at least for the next year. And even when a recession comes, whether it's in 1, 2 or 3 years, I don't know, you'd think it's going to come at some point. I do believe it's very likely that in the summer of last year, we saw the end of 40 years of falling inflation. Think about that. Think how huge that is to the world, to Britain, and to ourselves. The end of 40 years of falling inflation, falling interest rates, rising lending. This is the change that I've been talking about for the last 10 years. And it seems likely that it started a year ago. You must consider what this means to your assets, your income, and your retirement planning. because everything that has happened to you has happened in an era of falling inflation. And I'm trying to get across to you in these shows, as regular listeners will know, I've been talking about it. You will need to change your thinking from that's what we've had to this is what we're going to have. And that means rising inflation, rising interest rates, and probably economic stagnation, which is stagflation. Stagnation and inflation. It doesn't mean depression all the time, although I believe that we are in depression, slow or no growth for an extended period. We've already had it for 9 years. But I do believe that we're looking at stagflation. What would that be? At best, 2 or 3% growth. At worst, minus 1% growth. And with rising inflation and interest rates. Now, bring that forward, look at that forward for the next 10, 20, 30 years. It's not good for house prices, it's not good for stocks. It's good for commodities. It's not good for government bonds. Right. What is your wealth advisor saying to you about this stuff? Just back on the political side of things, I had a guy on Twitter who, appreciated Obama, which is crazy because he's actually quite an intelligent guy. Can't stand Trump. And he tweeted me because that the rocket man is firing off another rocket. And he tweeted me saying, we would never have got this close to America being hit by a North Korean rocket under Obama. And I said, it was Obama who gave Rocket Man the okay to develop his rockets. Numpty. But the point I was going to make was, because we're talking about China, the data shows that China imported 1.6 million tons of coal from North Korea in August 2017. Sorry, I beg your pardon. In August 2017. They've just banned coal imports from North Korea to start in February. Would that have happened under anyone other than Trump? China's gasoline exports to North Korea are down 96% year on year in August 2017. So they exported only 180 tons compared to whatever that means. It's down 96%. You realise, of course, the 4% has gone to Rocket Man himself to fuel up his Ferraris and his other fantastic cars. It's ugly. Janet Yellen, the Federal Reserve Chairman, I should say outgoing Federal Reserve Chairman, because absolutely no one believes that in January she's going to be reappointed for a second term. She spoke last week. She said inflation may exceed the 2% target, but not to worry. She's got an index-linked pension. She's okay. She said there is no need to wait for raising interest rates. So even though the economy is still lackluster, it's actually a little bit better than that. They're looking at maybe 3% growth around at this time, which isn't too bad, I suppose. But it's hardly taking off. But the point is, she said, there's no need to wait for raising rates. As I've been saying to you, it seems to me that the December hike is secure. We have inflation, folks. It's embedded for the next year. And as I say, long term, expect higher and higher inflation until eventually it's very likely we could see 1970 style inflation, and therefore expect higher and higher interest rates. Now, just on the other side, as I've been saying, I've been saying it was likely to happen while everyone was mega bearish on the US dollar. I was saying, no, it looks as if it's done pretty well what it's going to do, the fall in the dollar, and it's been rising, and it's continuing to rise. And by the way, just to remind you again, when everyone was mega bullish the dollar in January, I was saying the dollar was toast. And it then was toast. If the dollar is rising, has been for a couple of weeks, it looks as if it can do so for a little bit while longer. Now, we will not know yet if the rise is simply a bear market rally. At this stage, we simply don't know. I mean, there are people out there who say it is this or it's that. Don't listen to them. The best 3 words in investing is, I don't know. We do know the dollar's rising at the moment, and it has been for a couple of weeks, and it looks as if it's sustainable for another couple or few weeks. In any case, the rising dollar might well have a short-term detrimental effect on the price of commodities, and also the likes of gold, which, you know, I've been talking about as well. But as I say, until we get up to about, well, it can be anywhere really between 94 and 97 on the US dollar index. You can just Google it. You'll find it on Yahoo or stockcharts.com. Dollar index, the ticker is often DX or maybe dollar USD. And you'll see the dollar index against a basket of major currencies. And as I say, as the dollar rises, you can reasonably expect commodities to fall. So looking at gold, not so long ago, when gold was up at 1350, 1360, everyone was mega bullish. Not me. I was saying it's going to come back down. It went down to 1330. I'm still bearish. Everyone's bullish. Came back to 1300. Oh my God, the bullishness was extreme. The alarms were ringing. Oh gosh, I thought I was getting tinnitus. It's now down to the 1270s. And what did I say last week when it was actually in the 1300s? I said 1270 might well be a very good longer term buy point. And it still may be. And I can see possibly a bit of a bounce here simply because 1270 was a kind of a target. But I'll tell you, if it closes sub 1270, it's more likely it's going to go down to 1250, 1240. Still headed down. If it breaks those levels, you're looking at 1180, 1200. And I tell you, if we get to that level, I'm not saying we will, if we get to that level, the bearishness will be off the scale. That's when you buy, I would imagine. I should just point out, there is still a case for us going down to 900, 800, even 700. There is a case for us going down to 1100, which is slightly higher than the January 16 lows. In other words, that would be a double bottom. There is a case for going anywhere from here up to 1500, or from 1180 up to 1500. So, don't listen to people who say this or that is going to happen. There's cases for everything. Just follow what the market actually does. If you think that you ought to have gold and miners in your pension because of what the gurus say, well, they've been wrong for years. I'll just leave it at that. I say again that government bonds may well have peaked for a generation last summer. I can't say that for sure yet, but it's increasingly likely. I'm increasingly likely to reduce my exposure there. And the inflation, and this is maybe something you haven't got, the inflation is all about the gargantuan level of debt that we have. It's mathematically impossible to repay the debt. We have to default. There is no question we cannot repay the debt. Our democratic politicians have conned everyone into voting for them again and again so that they will borrow even more and give the people even more. Well, the people are acting entirely selfishly, but that's human nature. This idea about socialism, where you can regulate things and you can plan centrally, well, it's against human nature. That's why free market capitalism is a million miles ahead of everything else, of any other way of having a system, of an economic system, because it's human nature. And there are four ways of defaulting on debt for a government. To remind you, I did this several shows ago, I'm doing it again. You can have Argentinian default, where they literally shut up shop, zip closes, you're not getting your money, goodbye. They become an economic pariah. Hermits. Doesn't work for the people. Doesn't work, full stop. The second way is to have a Greek default, where a couple of years ago, the banks and the government defaulted on all the debts by saying, you lenders, do you know what, we'll give you your money in 50 or 100 years. Obviously, it's default. The third one is austerity. Don't talk to me about austerity. Isn't it terrible? We've had 7 years of austerity. Have we? Heck, we haven't had any austerity whatsoever. Austerity, listener, is not where one sector of the community has cuts and another sector has increases, but overall government spending rises. That's not austerity. That's just changing priorities. We haven't had any austerity. Austerity is a way to default on debt or sort out the debt problem, because you cut government spending. Imagine with our 3 or 4% inflation today, they cut current government spending by 5% a year. That would be an 8 or 9% cut that they could use to pay off the debts. And that would be meaningful. But it would be too painful for the voters. It's politically unpalatable. So it will never happen in democracy. I remember Michael Portillo, a cabinet minister in Thatcher's time, saying how difficult they found to cut. And, the socialists and the cronies still 25 years later talk about the Tory cuts. There was no cuts in spending in Thatcher's years. Similarly, there have been no cuts in spending in the last 7 years. So the only way that the politicians can actually default on the debt is by inflating the debt away. Clearly, if you can get up to 10% inflation, then automatically your debt is down 10% in purchasing power terms. You're still getting the 10% more in taxes, but you owe 10% less against the size of the economy. And it's just like your parents borrowed £30,000 in the 1970s to buy a fantastic home. By 20 years later, because of inflation, it was the equivalent of a monthly credit card statement. And in the meanwhile, that £35,000 house went up to £600,000 or £700,000 or £800,000. You know, when I think of people I know in North London who bought £50,000, £60,000 houses in the late 70s, they're now on £1.5 million homes, and they don't even realise how ugly and unnatural that is. They think it's perfectly natural. And they sit there and they watch property porn, and they read the property porn in the newspapers, and they think that they're financial geniuses. And then they vote Labour. It's just very short term, as I say, with the dollar going up. I think we could reasonably expect a pullback in emerging markets, in base metals, maybe gold, silver, miners, and oil. But we're looking at inflation generally. Thus, they are hot to trot. They are in a sense, what I mean is they are in an intermediate bull market, and it started in the early part of last year. I was talking about the economy is lackluster. There's a chart there in America from the Federal Reserve Economics Department. We can see that year-on-year employment growth is at 4-year lows. It's still positive year-on-year, but it's the slowest in 4 years. And it's getting down towards the level of employment growth that saw the peak in 2007. So your guess is as good as mine as to what that means, but it's lackluster growth in employment, obviously. And we should be more focused not on the numbers employed, but on the year-on-year growth in employment. We aren't entering recession. Just keep these things in mind. And I tell you what, the stock market will tell us if a recession looms in 6 or 12 months' time. And the stock market is hitting all-time highs week after week. So, those who are bearish are numpties. There's a chart there of leading economic indicators for emerging markets and developed markets in the OECD. And you can see that since late 2015, early 2016, there has been a very significant upturn in the leading economic indicators. We are not heading towards recession. On the contrary, if we see a downturn, well, that's different, but we don't see a downturn. The next chart, as I said to a friend of mine when I sent it to him, is one of the greatest charts I've ever seen in my life. It shows Australian mortgage debt to GDP. Look at that. Since 1990, mortgage debt as a proportion of GDP absolutely went practically vertical. You know, they talk about Australia, the lucky country, because it hasn't had a recession in 27 years. Oh, look, quelle coïncidence. Mortgage debt started 27 years ago, or started to soar. At some point, that will reverse, and you watch what happens in the lucky country. Now, to show you how strange 2017 has been in market terms, the bar charts there it shows the highest fall intra-year in the S&P 500 for the last some 100 years. And look, the current year has seen the smallest fall in the history of the S&P 500 index. In other words, in history. That shows you how unvolatile the stock market has been this year. Now, of course, we've still got 3 months of the year left, although we are actually heading into the bullish half year, which is November to April. That's the bullish half year compared to May, of course, to October. And yes, it's true. We often see funny things happening in October, and we're obviously in October. But up till now, we've seen practically no drawdown in the stock market. It's incredible. The top chart is Russia. I'll tell you, you got to invest in Russia as well as emerging markets, particularly invest in Russia. It's hot to trot. The technical indicators are showing it. I'm moving on to quote of the week. Voltaire said something to the effect of, I may disagree with him, but I'll fight to the death for his right to say it. He also said, doubt is not a pleasant condition, but certainty is an absurd one. And that definitely applies to the markets. Those who are certain are absurd. There is no certainty in markets. Senator Bob Corker in the US. The greatest threat to the USA is not ISIS, not North Korea, not ascendant China, not Russia. It's the way we handle our finances. I couldn't agree with you more, Senator. And it's not the EU, it's not Islamists. The greatest threat to the West is our debts and our huge inequalities created by cronyism and socialism. We mourn those murdered by Islamic fascists, cultists. Forget this idea of fundamentalists. These guys are just very, very bad people. We mourn them. I'll see you next week.